Useless Monster by Mute Crows. Chapter 32, or 31. Izuku had expected this week to be mostly one-on-one, if he was honest. So the fact that he was back on a train so soon, heading to some other city that Gran Torino confidently informed him would have sprawling but open streets to patrol. It was apparently viewed as an important part of the first internship, since it was to show the student what all to be looking for when wandering on patrol. He held his phone loosely in his lap, not really interested in anything on it at the moment. Instead, he was looking out the window as Gran sat with his eyes closed next to him. They had been on it for a few minutes when he checked his phone. The weather app on it was updated to display the weather for Hosu. There was the wonder of if he should try texting Iida, but he didn't get to think about it for very long before he felt pain. A lot of pain, a very specific type of pain that he had only ever felt once before, and it was approaching the train car at breakneck speeds. His heart lurched as he jumped to his feet and looked in the direction of the pain. "Everyone brace yourselves!" he shouted with as much urgency as he could. There were a few confused noises as some people braced, but others just looked the same way he did. When the Nomu hit the train car, the confusion turned to panic as the car filled with shouts and screaming. No! Izuku whispered as he watched the Nomu start to get up. He didn't even get to say anything to Gran Torino before the hero was up and jetting towards the creature.
"Stay here, kid. I'll be right back."
And he was gone, taking the Nomu with him. "Okay, that is totally not happening," he said to the air as he quickly looked around the train. He couldn't feel anything different from before, apart from some shallow cuts from those closest to the impact area. Still, though, he felt the need to ask, "Is everyone all right?" He raised his voice enough to be heard over the clamoring, and when people gave him affronted looks because, of course, they were not emotionally all right, he clarified, "I have a healing quirk! Is anyone injured?" He watched as some of the individuals who put themselves back together faster than the rest looked around them, checking on nearby passengers. When no one specifically requested any help, he quickly hopped out of the hole in the train car. There was smoke in the distance, and if he stretched baton pass far enough, a number of moderate injuries in the same direction. He couldn't feel Gran Torino's ache specifically, not that he had enough time to truly familiarize himself with it. That left him with only one option. Go towards the fire. He was well on his way, the cowl of One for All making him feel as warm as he would when shifted, when he heard something he absolutely did not want to hear. Tanya, we are moving east! Where are you?" Izuku dropped down onto the streets and looked for the person calling for Iida. The blue hero costume stood out against the red tints of the roaring flames that were mere streets away. "Are you men well?" Izuku called out to the hero. The man looked at him and was clearly confused, not knowing who Izuku was, but recognizing a costume when he saw one. "Yes! All heroes are supposed to move east to evacuate civilians. Were you checking in?" He groaned in frustration because, of course, now of all times is when Iida decides to make his break for it. "No! Sorry, I have to go!" Izuku took off. He needed to get above the buildings. Hero killer victims in the news were always found in alleys, so he had to see how many were nearby the best he could. He pulled in baton past his range the best he could and started trying to find any cuts, gashes, or lacerations. It was so hard to focus on, though. There was so much white noise of pain. Burns, broken bones, scrapes and bruises, quirk aches from either heroes or civilians trapped and trying to survive. He can't even feel the ache he associates with Iida's quirk exhaustion onset either. He was about to start blindly searching when he felt a literal stabbing sensation through a left shoulder. His head whipped in the direction of the stab, and he started off at a sprint. The sparks of plasma lifted from his skin as he focused on how the pain suddenly got shocked into near nothing. He couldn't lose that spot, though. In his heart, he felt the way it would only result in the worst turn of events. As he got closer, he felt a second, equally muted stabbing victim. Rounding the corner in a blink, he registered the sword held in a backhanded grip over Iida's neck. He didn't think as he went straight at the man. Their eyes met as Izuku's fist whisked by, just shy of making contact with the masked face.
"Midoriya?"
Iida's shock was pushed back in Izuku's mind. He had to focus. He rolled, claws on his boots digging into the concrete to allow a redirect, and dashed forward again. The blades were lifted defensively, but Izuku dodged him to place himself between the hero killer and Iida.
"Another child, thinking they're a hero."
Izuku shifted his stance to be more grounded, not replying to the sneered words. He kept one of his hands back to where Stain couldn't see it. Iida was speaking again, but it was all words that Izuku didn't care to acknowledge. He pulled his phone out of his pocket as discreetly as he could. "What makes you say I only think that I am?" Izuku asked, trying to buy time. He really wished he had actually gone over the emergency ping a few more times as he hesitated on what press pattern he was supposed to do. The phone buzzed once, and he slid the phone back into his pocket. He kept the hand up. The amount of blades that he could count did not make the lack of any plan in his mind suddenly solidify into something.
Cocky teens are all talk, just like the heroes they train under. Midoriya, you need to leave. This has nothing to do with you.
Iida, for the love of... Izuku wanted to turn around and shake some sense into his friend, but a knife was thrown at the other person in the alley. He dove forward and managed by some miracle to hit the handle of the blade and knock it off course. "Okay, we're doing this then," he murmured as he gripped the apparent hero by their clothes. He kept his eyes on the hands that were back on the sword handles as he jumped back to Iida, dragging the hero with him. It would be easier to defend one position than two. They both dropped to the starting stances.
I can't move, Midoriya,
Iida told him through grit teeth. "Yeah, I got that. Your pain is muted. You're paralyzed," he said as he tried to figure out if it would be best to play defense or offense.
It's Stain's quirk. I don't know how it works, but his quirk paralyzes you.
"This was stupid!" Izuku nudged his foot back enough to tap Iida's hand. He was trying to test his range, but it also just was a way to draw his friend's attention. "This was so stupidly, incredibly selfish!" Stain's gaze was steady, studying Izuku as much as Izuku was studying him back. There's a light there Izuku couldn't quite decipher. The lack of movement made him nervous, though. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Twice. "What kind of hero tries to kill for revenge?" It made Izuku's stomach turn. He watched as Stain started to grin, hands adjusting their hold.
You wouldn't understand.
Iida whispered it under his breath. Izuku knew he wasn't supposed to hear that. "I'll save you both! I can heal this!" Stain sheathed one of the swords in a sharp motion, and Izuku rushed him again. You can't let opponents get the upper hand in street fights. He has seen enough people die or be left for dead by allowing as much to know that for a fact. He tried to hook a foot and sweep it out from under Stain. The instant the blade caught his upper arm, he forged one for all into baton pass. The blade left his skin clean, the immediate healing applying enough pressure to effectively wipe it off as it swiped through. He could see the surprise that flickered across his face, and it was all the distraction he needed. Izuku swung a punch that landed directly where his nose should have been. He had been hoping to disorient so that he could knock him out, but the lack of crunch as Stain got sent back a few meters from the force alone was stark. He chased after, sliding between his legs when a dagger was pulled from a sheath and swung out. A jump put him out of Stain's sight as the villain twisted sharply. He brought his heel down hard. The muted thud of Stain hitting the ground probably shook the concrete. Iida had sucked in a sharp inhale on impact. Izuku followed the momentum and rolled again to land back on his feet. He bounced back a bit to crouch low. He wasn't in front of Iida this time. He didn't like that he wasn't. "I don't know your quirk, but you carry so many blades for a reason," Izuku said, his clawed boots dug into the concrete, about to move in front of Iida once more, when he saw a tongue swipe the concrete. The moment the swipe happened, Izuku felt his ability to move vanish. It was different from how Shinso's quirk felt. This felt like it was frozen solid. He could distantly feel what Baton Pass was feeling, everything numbed in a way that felt distinctly wrong. Stain got up and grinned as he walked towards Izuku. Everything he knew said this was going to be it. His heart raced. He tried to think of anything he could do. He tried, and he failed. The only thing he succeeded in doing was taking Yagi's quirk, and now he was going to snuff it out. Izuku refused to close his eyes. He watched Stain as he was frozen in his crouch. It was strange. He was so scared, and yet, as he kept his eyes locked on the red of Stain's, there was an air of mutual respect he could feel.
Heroes these days are money chasers. As I said, they're all talk and come a dime a dozen.
Stain spun his blade in a flourish as he stopped in front of Izuku.
But you are worthy of the title hero, aren't you? A force that may one day even equal All Might in quality.
he huffed as Izuku didn't respond.
You are worth saving.
He turned away and looked at Iida and the hero where Izuku had left them.
These two, though.
The blade audibly whistled as it flew towards Iida, and Izuku's gut dropped. He couldn't close his eyes. This was it. He was losing someone. Again. Flames shot out, and the blade fell short, clattering against ice. Midoriya emergency location notices usually have a note attached about whatever is going on, from what I understand. Todoroki walked forward until he was at Iida's side. Oh, how Izuku could have cried in relief right then and there, even as Stain sneered again, grumbling about the kids running around the town. Todoroki took one step, ice surging forward the instant his soul touched the ground as his side started to flicker to life with flame. The ice veered slightly to curve around Izuku. Stain growled his annoyance as he dodged back far enough to finally get some height. Izuku saw the blade being unsheathed from over the hip, and his breath caught. "Don't let him lick your blood! It's the trigger somehow!" he shouted. The briefly disgusted look Todoroki got at the apparent thought of licking the blood of strangers would have been amusing at literally any other time.
Saw that one, huh?
Stain threw the blade away. Todoroki swept his arm out, fire arcing in a wave. The sound of the flames was strange as it echoed off the alley walls. Ice was brought up behind it that the knife sunk into.
Blocking your own line of sight isn't always the smartest thing, kid.
As Stain jumped up to have an angle over said ice, Izuku felt his senses rush back in. He didn't hesitate to take the crouch he was in as a kickoff. He hit Stain bodily, ruining his throw of 3 knives that now harmlessly hit the wall. Stain landed on a unit up the opposite one. Izuku was caught by a slope of ice and ended up at Todoroki's feet. "What's the plan?" Todoroki tapped his boot clean of ice. "Gotta be honest, didn't have one beyond don't die for this!" Izuku took the momentary stalemate to try and better assess Iida. He couldn't spare the thought before now. The damage, muddled as the sensations were with the paralysis, was scarily extensive. He debated it for a moment before deciding to take the damage to the skin and some muscle. He couldn't risk anything else right now, but that would at least stop Iida's risk of bleeding out. "I told my father to send reinforcements this way as soon as he met other heroes." Todoroki spoke low as he moved to take the offensive. "Don't die until then, I guess." It became a flurry of exchanges then. Izuku would charge in, closing the distance as best he could. Todoroki tried to corral Stain. Stain would dodge and take the swings and throws he could. Izuku was never more thankful that his costume was fluid resistant, even as he loathed how slick his own blood was making the inside. He was stealing every single superficial wound he could, anything to keep blood away from Stain. The pain was building though, his exhaustion from rapid healing starting to drag on him. 3 blades were thrown again in a fan. Todoroki twisted to pull up ice. There was a flare of sudden pain. Iida's arm intercepted. He bit down on the cry of pain as the blades sunk into the hilts. Izuku felt how it went all the way through his arm. It didn't stick out of the armor though. Izuku took enough that the skin closed around the blades. He was so worried Iida would pass out from blood loss. He wasn't putting too much focus into immediately healing the things he was stealing anymore. He had to stay on top of the other's injuries as well as landing whatever blows he could. The buzz began. No! It was the last thing he needed. It never began after nightfall before. It was a day-long thing. Panic built. He was in pain. He held his grip tightly as the buzzing grew. The panic was choking him. He was getting sloppy, and he knew it. He wanted the other heroes to never come now. It was a danger for him. If they never came, it was a danger for Iida and Todoroki, though. The buzz started to feel like a vibration. He hated it. Todoroki was having to pull up waves in Izuku's defense on occasion now. His grip was slipping. He dug in as hard as he could. It hurt so badly to do so. It was like holding onto a ball of pins and blades. It made it hard to keep the gates around One for All only cracked. He sharply backed away from them all. Plasma felt scalding instead of warm. His grip was getting damaged. It hurt. It was slicing through his form, and it hurt so damn much!
Midoriya!
Iida called out without taking his eyes off of Stain. He tried to think of something to say, but all that came out was a strangled... He shifted violently, plasma still arcing off of his form. The thing he was most thankful for was that he was his normal self. No spurs visible. Iida made a shocked sound, and Izuku saw the panic that flickered across Todoroki's eyes. Stain looked lost as to how to handle the sudden change. Izuku let out a hissing breath, teeth cracked enough to let out the air. "Guys, run! Why you do this?" He changed his stance, well aware of the amount of blood on his body. It was no longer hidden by the protection of his hero costume. Stain looked ecstatic.
Yes! That's what a true hero does!
He was panting lightly as he spoke, teeth bared. Izuku could hear the plasma that crackled along his antenna and surged forward. Mouth opened just enough to grab Stain by his arm and sling him directly into the wall. The concrete cracked. Blood was in his mouth, but he wasn't sure whose it was exactly. He dropped Stain at the taste of it and hopped away. He coughed when his inhale took blood with it. It splattered the ground. The sight of it apparently was what it took to shake his friends out of it. His eyes locked onto the mangled mess of an arm Stain had now. He hadn't realized he bit that art. He wanted to throw up, but Stain was grabbing more blades. How did he have so many knives? And getting up to continue the fighting. His friends weren't safe, not yet, even as his mouth tasted horribly of iron. He tried to angle himself to look intimidating, hoping against hope that he could get Stain to back down. His quills rattled violently as he clacked his teeth. Stain dashed towards him, but ice surged in between them. Stain turned and threw what he had in his hand at Todoroki and Iida. They blocked and dodged, respectively. Izuku climbed the ice wall easily. He used his weight as momentum as he slid down the steep far side and swung a large hand. The swat hit Stain across the side of his head. It left the man dazed, with the thudding pain that ran through him was a reliable gauge. He leapt back away from Izuku, but it put him closer to the others. Iida rushed him, recipro giving him the boost he needed to land a kick that sent Stain into the wall once more. Todoroki had already been forming ice there that overtook Stain's form before the villain could struggle away. Izuku felt the way the pain rapidly grew muted. His friends were both back to their grounded stances they used for defense. He rattled as he pressed his antenna back and started to walk towards them. Iida twisted towards him with a cautious look. Todoroki was tense and not looking at him at all. His heart dropped. He could smell the blood in his own mouth. Monster. He tried to talk, but it slurred and sounded like nothing. I can help. He finally got it out. He watched how Todoroki's face scrunched briefly like Izuku had hurt him just by talking. Guilt and panic lanced through him as he backed away from them again. He was horrible. He didn't know why he had ever started to think any differently. Don't take anything else, Midoriya, Todoroki said, still not looking at him. You're covered in your own blood. His tone was wrong. Izuku couldn't figure out why it was wrong. I'm sorry. He sat down and tried to fold over himself somehow. They were silent for a moment. It felt horrible.
Why didn't you...
A cry of panic cut Iida off, and Izuku jumped back to his feet. The hero had woken up and was staring at Izuku, who seemed to be standing off against Todoroki and Iida. On top of that, he heard the approaching run of multiple people. He could only assume they were the heroes Endeavor had sent. Izuku's breathing picked up. He couldn't be caught, not in the middle of a Nomu attack. They would only see a bloody monster. He stepped back quickly, slipping on the ice.
Oh, wait!
Iida started towards him, but Izuku was already turned away and disappearing over the edge of a roof. He doesn't go far, though. Ever paranoid about the safety of things important to him, he stopped a few streets down. His antennae were pressed up to hear over the edge of the roof, and he kept baton pass, searching. One for all was caged back up. The plasma would give him away. He could hear the way the hero that had seen him was trying to lecture his friends to keep an eye for the thing that got away because he might come back. He would, eventually, just not like this. A skid on the ground, and he heard a voice he very much so didn't want to hear.
Endeavor sent us this way. What did you kids get into?
Gran scolded. Izuku wished he could see what was going on as he heard more people stop moving. Is that the hero killer? A voice asked incredulously. There was a hissing noise that must have been Todoroki melting the ice holding Stain to the wall. The talking got jumbled from there, though, too hard to pick apart from the distance he was listening from, mostly because of how people started talking over each other. He could hear the clatters of what might be Stain's knives and swords, if he guessed right. Someone mentioned tying with rope, and Izuku dropped his antenna down to not be visible over the edges. He really didn't want to risk being seen and tied up himself. They were probably on the lookout for Nomu still anyways.
Get down!
Gran Torino's shout echoed off the walls of the building. Izuku felt claws digging into ribs. He heard shouts of surprise. His head whipped up and over the edge, and he watched as the Nomu flew past him with Todoroki in its clawed feet. He didn't even think as he leapt off the roof and hit the Nomu, wrapping himself to hold any part of the flying creature that he could. His feet carefully gripped Todoroki as his forearms reached over the shoulders. "If I drop you, can you catch yourself?" Izuku asked as best as he could. It warbled horribly from his jittered nerves, but Todoroki was looking at him with wide eyes now. He nodded, and Izuku gripped him as securely as he could in his clawed feet without hurting him. Once he was confident he could see Gran Torino jetting towards them, he pried off the Nomu's hold and dropped Todoroki. As the ice came up towards them, Izuku pulled away the pierced holes in Todoroki's side. Gran fell back to ensure Todoroki's safe landing. The Nomu twisted to fight Izuku off of him now that he had stolen his victim away. It screamed and dug its claws into the flesh on Izuku's neck, and Izuku screamed back. He felt the muted pain suddenly surge back to the forefront. Stain had woken up. The Nomu started to drag him further over its shoulders. Izuku couldn't reach where the Nomu was holding his throat. He screamed louder in panic.
Meh!
Iida started to shout with clear distress when the Nomu froze stiff. Stain somehow was there. His knife sank with a sharp cutoff but intense pain into the exposed brain of the Nomu. The amount of injuries and pain Stain was in meant that the three of them were stuck falling rapidly to the road below. Stain pulled the claws out of where they were sunk into his throat. Izuku didn't know how to feel about that part, but it felt wrong to just kill the villain by letting him hit the ground after he saved Izuku's life. So he wrapped a forearm around Stain and curled up. He took the brunt of the impact and rolled to keep it from breaking anything. He let go of Stain halfway through the roll. He could feel the strain of every part of Stain's body fighting the act of standing up, but he didn't put thought into what he was doing. His head was spinning, and he was busy blinking rapidly as he got to his feet a few meters behind him. He shook his head to clear the dizziness and turned to see Stain, standing but unmoving. He wasn't talking anymore, but Izuku had missed any of what he said. From the way he was being looked at, it wasn't anything good. He saw a flaming figure running up the street towards them all. Oh no! He turned and stumbled as he started to run again. Each stride made his side hurt more as it pulled at the claw wounds he stole. He heard Gran curse under his breath and start to give chase. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. Why didn't I just tell him? Oh no! Ironically, the thing that made him start running in the first place is what saved him. Gran abruptly pulled back and away. The spear of flames seared across his side. The stink of burnt hair was all he left behind. He kept running. He couldn't risk staying anywhere nearby anymore, so he kept turning down streets he didn't recognize and didn't care if he was seen. Everyone was supposed to be evacuated because of the Nomu attack. When he found an alley with only one lamp, he stopped his run. He reached up and broke the light off the wall. It was dark enough he would be able to hide if he hid his face. The stink of garbage and blood and burnt hair made him want to vomit. The alley was filthy. He curled tightly over his own head. He wanted to disappear. He was just so... Aizawa was running, phone in hand, with Kami eyes still showing Izuku at the same spot. He used his gear to swing forward larger distances faster than his legs could take him when he could. The trains that were headed for Hosu were shut down from the Nomu attack. It was interrupting the whole system, and he was only able to get halfway there before he had to go by foot. He had been called in before he had even gotten the emergency ping. That was just shy of 10 minutes ago. His phone buzzed, and he looked down to see a call from Iida. He answered and brought the phone to his ear. He didn't even get to say a greeting.
Sir, something happened with...
Aizawa heard shuffling, and the noise in the background muffled significantly.
Something happened to Midoriya-kun? I don't know how to describe it.
He picked up his pace, grip on his phone tightening. Is he near you?
No, he ran because of the,
Muffled talking interrupted Iida.
Apologies, Todoroki-kun is going to take the phone.
Todoroki is in Hosu? He is supposed to be at his father's headquarters in this kind of situation. Sensei. Todoroki's tone was terse. Iida said that something happened to Midoriya. He prompted. You knew he was the one at USJ. Yes. It held more weight than he understood at the moment. There was more to the question than was being said. I did. He wanted to rush this along. He didn't have the time for this, but these kids were his to care for during their stay at UA, and he intended to fulfill his role as homeroom teacher thoroughly. You know about his home. Izuku told him. I do. He has been in my care since shortly after USJ. Todoroki seemed to consider this. He shifted, didn't he? Was he attacked? He asked instead. He used his quirk. A lot. He was covered in blood, but it was mostly his own. My father claimed he was a Nomu, as well as the other heroes who got there. Todoroki took a steadying breath as the worry started to bleed into his voice. He got burned, Sensei. I didn't see how badly. Aizawa grit his teeth and pressed his phone against his chest. It was hard fought to beat back the urge to throttle every last hero that shot first and asked questions later. It always caused issues. He put the phone back to his ear. Are you and Iida safe? We've got some lingering injuries that Midoriya hadn't taken. The heroes here have called both police and emergency services to get us to a local hero hospital. Iida hadn't seen the main floor of USJ, so this is the first time he has seen. Todoroki explained. He also has lost a decent amount of blood, which is why I took the phone. Aizawa made a noise to acknowledge the information. He checked his phone again. Izuku had not moved. The distance indicated another hour easily unless he managed some good shortcuts. He needed to get off of the call. I will get to him. We don't know where he is. I do. Go with your mentors, he instructed. Yes, Sensei. And Todoroki hung up. Aizawa focused on the information given, holding it as fuel to cover the distance faster, if possible. He was only human, after all. When the phone buzzed in his hand again, he slowed. He looked at the map that showed his locator had entered the map section where Midoriya remained. He had only shaved off roughly 15 minutes of the trip, but it still felt far too long. He watched the map carefully as it zoomed in to bracket the two locators, ever-increasing map details as it did so. When he stopped in the junction of an alley to the main street, the first thing he noticed was the stink of garbage. He checked his phone, and the locator pinged Izuku as a couple dozen meters down the alley. There was a sparking wire hanging from one of the walls, and he could guess what had been there. Midoriya, he called out softly. There was a shuffling sound, and he could see the slightly lighter spot in the dark that must have been Izuku's head appear. He started down the alley. Was there not a cleaner alley to hide in? What the heck happened? Did the three of them get into a fight with a Nomu? He had so many more questions he wanted to pull the answers out for. They didn't matter right now, though. Izuku warbled again. It sounded more like he had tried to say something, and it didn't exactly work. Aizawa turned on his flashlight and took in the sight. Only years of practice kept his face from reacting. The fur was burnt off of his left side, skin pink, but not blistered. The vents, though, looked dark and incredibly irritated. Punctures curved around his ribs. The amount of blood on him was unnerving, but the most alarming was the blood dried onto his teeth and jaw. He grit his teeth again when he saw the tears in Izuku's throat. Izuku's curled crouch was keeping him from laying in the pooling blood below him, which was a small relief. A broken light lay next to his hands. More warbled noises. You don't have to try to talk, Midoriya. He looked at his eyes and saw the tears streaming down his face. Afraid. Aizawa hesitated before he turned off the light. Oh no, that's only natural. He sat down next to Izuku and leaned against his hip. Don't ignore your fears casually. Fear is what keeps you alive and safe. It's a warning. I'm afraid. Izuku's breath hiccuped as he let out a breathy sob. We will be okay. So will Todoroki and Iida. He only got a shaky warble in response, followed by more quiet sniffs and hiccups. Aizawa closed out the Kami Eyes tracking and opened a browser. He looked through the names of local hero hospitals to try and find the one he recognized. They would have to wait until Izuku shifted back to head there, but it was a number he wanted to be able to call as soon as that happened. The following hour is spent with Aizawa playing music quietly, so that way Izuku would relax some. When he did finally shift back, he was wobbly on his feet. His costume looked deceivingly clean, but Aizawa held his arm carefully. The blood around Izuku's mouth made his heart twist as he walked them into the light at the start of the alley. He pulled gauze out of one of his own pouches as he lowered Izuku to sit on the sidewalk. He grabbed a small thing of distilled water out of a different pouch and dampened the gauze.
I don't carry towels, so this will have to do,
He explained.
Sit still.
Izuku didn't look at him as Aizawa cleaned the blood off around his mouth. Even with that, he could see how red Izuku's eyes were. Once there wasn't any questionable blood, he stood again, pulling his student up with him.
We are going to the hospital. I will be in the building the whole time,
he said, even as Izuku tensed.
You're exhausted and injured, Midoriya. You need treatment and rest.
Okay. His voice sounded rough and raw. Aizawa pulled his capture gear from his shoulders and crouched in front of Izuku.
Get on. You look near collapse, and I'm not letting you wriggle out of the carry like you have on our trips home. The hospital is a bit more than an hour's walk.
Izuku didn't move.
I figured you would like time to figure out what to say to your classmates. They will likely be contacting you as soon as they can.
Aizawa twisted pointedly to have his back towards Izuku as he remained crouched. Izuku's arms draped over his shoulders. He used the capture gear to secure Izuku in place. He hooked his hands under Izuku's knees as he stood. The walk was steady going, where he let go of one leg to pull his phone out of his pocket and just hit the dial button. It rang twice before a lady answered. He spoke with her briefly. He told her his hero name, his ETA, and to have a bed ready for medical assistance when he got there. She didn't offer to send emergency services. Aizawa knew they were better to use for the civilians who had been caught in the crossfires of different battles. He hung up and put his phone back. As he hooked his hand under Izuku's knee again, he felt the boy's chin fall onto his shoulder. Soft breathing blew Aizawa's hair in front of his mouth briefly away with each exhale. Aizawa was careful to not wake him whenever he adjusted his grip.